What's up everyone, Kaze no What If is here with What If Deku was a villain. Before we start, if you like the video, like it, share with your friends, comment, and let's start the video. Shinsu hadn't gotten over the feeling that everything that had happened was some sort of dream. The police and other heroes on the scene had gone over everything that had happened that day in further detail. He'd stuck to what Eraserhead had said, that his quirk had initially activated on accident and he'd tried to help the heroes like that. With Eraserhead's testimony and the lack of damage to anybody else, he'd been released 30 minutes later with a warning that any further activations of his quirk without a license, accidental or not, would be met with a fine and a criminal record. He sighed, glancing over the address he'd been given and a time after school hours. Shinsu hadn't even thought about the piece of paper, feet going on autopilot back home. The entire situation seemed so surreal, being beaten up by a midget villain, his personal hero telling him that he had potential to be a hero, him grabbing the man and begging the hero to train him. He opened the door to their apartment to find his mother rushing forwards, Dad obviously not home yet. Tall with black, wavy hair, she frantically looked over him. Shinsu. Are you okay? I got a call from the police, you didn't answer your phone and I'm honestly this close to a breakdown. Shinsu just stared at her as she continued to look over him. Were you hurt? Are you in trouble? Shinsu managed to get out a, no, I'm fine. He checked his phone, he'd forgotten to charge the damn thing this morning. His mother relaxed. All right. She sighed, then she frowned and crossed her arms, then what were you thinking? You could have gotten hurt. Shinsu nodded, yeah, I know. I had a bunch of pro heroes tell me the exact same thing for 10 minutes. Don't you snark about this, young man. She pulled him closer, dark purple spiraling eyes glistening with tears. You could have gotten seriously hurt. You were lucky that it wasn't that laser-firing villain. I get it, Mom. It won't happen again. The police just gave me a warning after hauling me over the coals. She stared at him. Only a warning? Huh. A trace of bitterness entered her voice. They didn't give me a warning when I was your age. Shinsu couldn't help but wince. His mom's quirk was, like his, one of those so-called villains' quirks, known as hypnosis. His own quirk was just a version of hers that needed vocals rather than eye contact. She'd never really used it. People had still avoided making eye contact with her, still freaked out if she spoke in a calm way. But she'd managed to be somewhat popular, if only because she was tall with good hair. Then there had apparently been something bad in the girls' bathrooms involving a wealthy student with a heroic quirk as described by the school. Mom had only ever mentioned the barest details and Shinsu had never had the courage to dig it up on seeing the pain in his mother's eyes. All he knew was that a fellow student had been involved, and it had been bad. She'd used her quirk then, gotten the girl to safety and called the police on him. Instead, the guy had claimed that she'd used her quirk to frame him. That she had lured him in there with intent to defame him. When she'd denied it, other students had stood up for him, claiming that he was a good guy, that he could never do that. It all had to be her, trying to stop his heroic's career before it even started out of jealousy. Even with the other girl trying to speak up, the school had covered for him, and he was let off without even a slap on the wrist. His mom, on the other hand, had been given a black mark in her record and a reputation as a troublemaker. Her parents had tried for a lawsuit, but the school had chosen to give a settlement. He had made it into a hero school and apparently was a graduate, even if he'd never made it big like he'd boasted. She'd barely made it into a half-decent school. After graduating, jobs were scarce for somebody with a mark on her record about using a mental quirk on others. So she was stuck in a dull office job that she was overqualified for because it was the only one that would hire her. About the only good thing that came out of her job, she'd said before, was that she'd met his father and had Shinsu. Shinsu didn't say anything for a short while. "Mom." He swallowed. "I had somebody in my corner then." His mom looked him in the eye, face caught between disbelieving and hopeful. "Really?" Shinsu nodded. "Yeah. A hero." His mom just scoffed. "Right. A hero. One of those cash grabbers then? Somebody who says that all quirks are equal." Shinsu shook his head. Eraserhead. Shinsu looked his mom in the eyes. He lied to the police about me using my quirk accidentally." The door opened then, his dad coming in on a tableau of his son and wife just talking, mom standing there shocked. "Ah, I'm home." He managed to get out before he was cut off by a shout from her. "What?" Shinsu nodded. "Yeah, I can't believe it either." His dad stood there in the hallway, purple hair slicked back and suit disheveled. "Shinsu, you. What happened?" Shinsu opened his mouth when his mother cut him off. "He's been trying to catch villains." It was just the one villain. And apparently his personal hero comes around and lies to the police for him. His dad boggled, before looking at his wife. "Nimue-chan." Mom shook her head. "He was attacked by a villain." I mean, he's lucky that there were pros on the scene to help him." "I mean, what if the villain's other friends had come to try and His dad made a zip it motion with his hand. "Nimue-chan." As mom was temporarily silenced, he turned to Shinsu. "Is this true? You tried to brainwash a villain by yourself?" Shinsu nodded. "I nearly had His dad cut him off. "Shinsu, you really shouldn't have endangered yourself like that." Shinsu nodded. I know that. Got told enough Shinsu. His dad looked him directly in the eye. "You know that we're concerned for you, don't you?" When Shinsu nodded, he continued. "Now, I'm not going to tell you off more about this, since it seems that your mother and the police have done that already. What matters is that you're home and safe." He cracked a grin. "And you're going to have to tell me all about it later." Mom sighed. "You shouldn't encourage him going into heroics, Kazuya." She started pulling out plates for dinner. "I don't want to have to identify my son's body." "Is that so much to ask?" Dad just chuckled, removing his jacket. "You worry too much, Nimue-chan." She flicked him on the side of the head lightly. "I'm his mother. It's my job to worry about my son, especially since he's going off and trying to brainwash villains." Shinsu looked down at his feet. He really hadn't thought it through, had he? He thought about what the situation would have been like if one of the other villains had gotten to him. It was just the one villain. But don't worry. Shinsu started getting the plates onto the table, his parents watching him. It won't happen again. Later, Shinsu was looking over the piece of paper again when his dad came in. "Hey." Shinsu looked up. "Hey." His dad looked him in the eye. "Now, I want to hear about what happened." Shinsu winced. It was kind of embarrassing, really. He recounted what happened, his dad nodding along with the story. When he got to the bit about being beaten up by La Brava, his dad just patted him on the back. "That sounds pretty bad, Shinsu." Shinsu just nodded. "Yeah, it sucked." His dad just nudged him. "And it's funny, you have to admit." "It's not funny." Shinsu shot back, his dad backing off, hands in the air. Shinsu paused, looking back on it. Well, maybe a little. Okay, okay. No more interruptions. Carry on. Idly, Shinsu wondered what Mastermind was doing as he retold the story. Meanwhile, Midoriya Izuku sneezed in his sleep. He turned over, pen in hand, twitching as ideas came to him in his dreams. His sheets were already mostly covered in designs for body armor, robot minions, and death rays. The notebook on his bed had already been filled with half-sketched ideas. In the morning, he would beat himself up for scribbling on his limited edition Silver Age Might sheets, but that was a problem for conscious Izuku to deal with. And then he gives me a piece of paper and tells me to meet him there tomorrow, Shinsu finished. Dad just smiled. Well, are you? Shinsu nodded, and his dad patted him on the shoulder. I won't lie to you, Shinsu. I don't want to have to identify your body any more than your mother does. But I think that if you put your mind to it, you can do it. Shinsu nodded. I know, Dad. His dad just smiled. I'm serious. And about your homework, I don't mean to nag you, but dash. I get it, Dad. It's been done already, you don't have to nag. Just saying. He stood up and was about to leave, then paused. Good night, Shinsu. Good night. School for Shinsu was, well, school. The incident at the mall had mostly entered legend at this point, no details released yet since there was no high-profile hero dealing with it. Mastermind and his cronies had apparently released a video this morning detailing why they'd robbed a random jewelry store. Shinsu checked it over, incredulous. The grave robbing was pretty bad, but what startled Shinsu was that there wasn't any video of him. More specifically, there was a brief video clip of somebody being beaten up by the short villain, La Brava, apparently, but nothing that could be identified. Wow, that guy's gotta be pretty weak to get beaten up by a toddler. One of his classmates laughed. No, she only looks like a toddler. But I mean, this guy's pretty tall, why did he have so much trouble? Shinsu just twitched. If he never met Mastermind or La Brava again, it'd be too soon. Izuku sneezed, pen briefly stopping its frenzied scrawl across the pages of his notebook. It then resumed, accompanied by a low mutter. The rest of the class was keeping a not-so-subtle eye on him as he continued muttering and scrawling in his notebook. He'd arrived at school with his pen flashing and a mutter storm encroaching, every other student giving him a wide berth due to how focused he was. Even the teachers looked slightly wary. Maybe it was in how he only blinked apparently once every 30 seconds. Or the shrunken pupils paired with the veins standing out in his eyeballs. It might have been the smile on his face, which was stretched ear to ear and hit the primitive monkey part of the human brain with the signal that he would attempt physical violence if somebody tried to take his notebook off of him. The teachers definitely knew that he was a major hero nerd and fan of science after the science teacher had received several schematics explicitly outlined as potential support gear. After the laser rifle schematic and the fifth test where he had corrected the questions, the science teacher had given up. In exchange for the required letter of recommendation to enter the support exam, Midoriya was given access to the lab, so long as no explosions went off. It was a happy arrangement for both parties, and it meant that students didn't have to deal with potentially being roped into experiments. Bakugo glared at the damn nerd. Oi, Deku. Bakugo's friends leaped back with fright as Midoriya snapped his head around to look Bakugo in the eye, smile seeming to stretch wider. Yes. Bakugo sighed. What the fuck are you doing? The damn nerd's eyes sparkled. Well, Kakin, I'm working on some really cool stuff like I'm working on some autonomous robots tatfleasing Earth's magnetics field dash. Bakugo clasped a hand over the nerd's mouth as he entered what other students and all of Izuku's teachers had labeled a critical mumble storm. The teachers may have given up on trying to get him to shut up, but not Bakugo. Shut the hell up, Deku. I'm working. Izuku just nodded, clearly lost in his own little world. Bakugo scoffed, turning back to his work. In front of him, Izuku continued mumbling, but at least he was quieter about it. Shinsu stared up at the building. After school had been through, he'd headed over to the address Eraserhead had given him. He hadn't known what to expect. Was it going to be Eraserhead's actual address? Some sort of high-profile gym? A cat cafe? He had been prepared, bringing his exercise gear from home with him. What he got was what looked like a dingy warehouse in Narahata. It was in a less inhabited part of town and it honestly looked like it was about to fall down. Shinsu stared at it. Was this some sort of elaborate prank on Eraserhead's part? It wouldn't be the first time something like this had happened. A few too many invitations to social events had happened to be pranks in the past. Story of my life, I guess. I finally get told that what I want isn't so impossible and then he decides to mess with me. You're early. Shinsu jumped what felt like a whole foot in the air. Whirling around, he saw the familiar figure of Eraserhead standing there. The pro continued as if he hadn't nearly given Shinsu a heart attack. Enthusiasm is good. His tired-looking eye swept over Shinsu. Get changed. I want to see what you can do before I can make a proper training plan for you. Shinsu blinked, at first frozen in place. Then his body got into action. Quickly he ran into the warehouse, dashing behind a screen. As he changed, he got a further look at the place. The walls looked like they'd been holding quite a few weapons. A large board looked like there had been photos or other items pinned there until relatively recently. A set of weights, a couch, a fridge, it looked like a base of some sort. The rest of the warehouse looked like it had been set up was some sort of gym, with a knotted rope dangling from the ceiling over a padded floor. Shinsu stepped back out to see Eraserhead. Good. He looked Shinsu in the eye. How much do you know about fighting? Taken aback, Shinsu tried to think. I've watched a few martial arts movies. He tried, Eraserhead just staring at him with a flat expression. I've gotten into a few scrapes before. Eraserhead looked slightly unimpressed. How fit are you? Do you know about parkour? Shinsu swallowed. I started jogging a few months ago. I know what parkour is, but I've never done it. Eraserhead made a tooting sound, making a note in a small book. I've seen worse, he muttered, before looking Shinsu in the eye. This warehouse, it belongs to a friend of mine. He gave me permission to use it. Shinsu blinked, wondering as Eraserhead continued. We're going to start with a nice 2-kilometer jog. He glared at Shinsu. Understand this, Shinsu. I have other students to teach, so this is me taking time out of my life to help you. He tossed a small package at Shinsu, who scrambled to catch it. This is an initial training program, and I expect you to follow it. I'll adjust it as needed based on your current fitness. Overtrain or slack off and I will stop training you. Understood. Shinsu managed a shaky nod as he leafed through it. The small program was surprisingly detailed. Meal plans, exercises, stretches to warm up and cool down. I thank you. Eraserhead held up a hand to cut Shinsu off. This routine is not just to improve your general fitness, it will be me teaching you how to fight and move properly. Any whining about this program being too hard, and you can find another teacher. Shinsu just nodded. I honestly hadn't expected anything else. Eraserhead smiled. Or was that a leer? Good, now get warmed up and strap these on. He tossed a pair of what looked like black leg warmers at Shinsu. The teenager caught them, only to let out a small grunt at the weight. These are leg weights, each 1.5 kilograms. You'll be wearing them for this nice 2-kilometer run through the streets I planned. After that, we'll be doing close combat drills. Shinsu stared at Eraserhead, then the weights. He briefly thought about objecting, only to ruthlessly quash the thought. I've only got one chance at this. Better not blow it. Nodding, he went through his warm-up exercises as detailed in the book. Idly he wondered if anybody else was having as much trouble as he was. It was a horror movie in Gentle Criminal's house. There were scorch marks on the walls, the lights flickering ominously. The other villains had each made their escape, making for the front room. Golden Grin looked around for the last bastion of safety, only to see the glowing red visor of the shorter villain round the corner. Come on fellow villains. I have so many beautiful creations to share with you. Golden Grin sprinted away from the shorter villain, trying to get behind the door before it fully closed. Come on guys. Don't leave me like this. On the other side of the door, Mr. Compress shook his head. Sorry about this, young man. He heaved the door shut, Inkblot and Stitch already rushing to barricade it, but your sacrifice shall be duly noted. Golden Grin pounded the door. Let me in. Let me in. I dash. Oh hey, Golden Grin. Golden Grin froze, fist on the door. Slowly, he turned around, to see a villain that he had half a head on cheerfully coming closer. I just need you to test out this new body armor. I think I've worked out all the kinks for it. I've also worked out the kinks in that dash. Golden Grin tried to force his way through the door. No please. He scrabbled at the door, only for Mastermind to grab him by the legs. Help. Help me. Don't leave me here. He wailed as the much shorter villain dragged him away back to his lair laboratory, hands desperately scrabbling to find purchase on the floor. I don't wanna be a guinea pig. Behind the door, La Brava winced. He wasn't this bad before, was he? The other villains shook their heads. Ah, typical gearhead. Stitch opined, already pouring himself a drink. Mr. Compress looked at him. What do you mean? Stitch waved a hand vaguely. You see a lot of the really crazy ones in the technical fields. They're brilliant, mad as hatters but brilliant. He shrugged at their stares. He'll get it out of his system eventually. Or he'll moderate himself. He took a pull. He seems a bit saner than most of them I worked with, at least he hasn't offered cybernetic upgrades yet. Gentle Criminal shuddered. I really wish I did know about this happening before we'd let him in and volunteered to test the gear out. The shorter villain had shown up with that small car of his, positively buzzing with excitement and eager to show off past inventions and new ones that he was sure the other villains would like. The other villains had been slightly wary of his demeanor, but had consoled themselves with the thought. What's the worst that could happen? Several minor explosions later, each and every one of them was regretting thinking that. Inkblot just shuddered. I knew he was too good to be true, she whispered, hugging her knees close to herself. I knew that there had to be something off with him. La Brava knelt near the slightly older lady. What did he do? Inkblot whimpered. That support gear. If I'd had a regular arm it would have broken it. He just. I know, he smiled, and said, whoops. I know what I did wrong with this. I'll get it ready without a problem. No shit. La Brava shuddered. The virtual reality display in my helmet malfunctioned. He just pulled it off, asked for my advice on some other gear and tried to strap a jetpack on me. Gentle criminal swallowed. That tea machine of his. It exploded. And all he said was that it was an unfortunate accident, but he'd get it working again. He shuddered. He wasn't the kind of man to cry over spilled tea, but a superheated tea explosion that had caused the tea to start melting through wood. He could live without ever experiencing that again. Stitch just shrugged. Some of the people I went to school with were worse. At least he isn't calling them his babies or something. Outside, it sounded like Golden Grin was trying to escape from another equipment test and failing miserably. Hopefully he snaps out of it soon, La Brava whispered. Shinsunemu looked over her son as he lay in bed, passed out. A week ago she'd been confused when Shinsu said that he was going to be doing some activities after school so he would be home later. She'd asked him what he was doing. He'd said that he was training to get into UA. Trying to learn how to run and fight. Her first instinct had been to say no. She didn't exactly have the best opinion of heroes, seeing them more as glory hounds than anything else. But she also knew that Shinsu, more than anything else, wanted to be a hero. Wanted to go beyond his villainous quirk and help people. She had ultimately agreed, and he'd come home exhausted and covered in sweat. He'd explained that he was training with Eraserhead and the hero had drawn up an exercise and meal plan for him. She'd stared at him. What did he have you do? Are you sure you're all right? He just grinned up at her. I've never been better. That had brought her up short. It had been a while since she'd seen her son so happy. He'd asked her to help him with the plan Eraserhead had suggested. The only thing she'd asked him was to get a contact number for Eraserhead, in case something went wrong. He agreed. After getting in, he went to do his homework, had eaten dinner with them with a ferocious appetite, then staggered off to bed and passed out as soon as he hit the covers. This had been the routine for the past week. Nemu sighed, running a hand through her hair. Are you worried about him? Nemu didn't turn as she heard her husband come up behind her, hand coming to rest on her shoulder. As I've said many times before, I'm his mother. Of course I'm worried about him. Kazuya nodded. That's certainly true. Practically the whole job of parents is to worry about their kids. Nemu just sighed. Certainly feels that way. She closed the door to his room quietly, then turned to her husband. Kazuya. Does it make me a bad mother that I want to tell him to stop? Kazuya only stared at her as she continued. There's a lot of dangerous villains out there. I'd thought that our son is going to be fighting those kinds of villains if he gets into UA and graduates. I don't want to think about it. Kazuya just hugged her. I know. I have a lot of nightmares about something like that happening. She stared at him. Then why dash? Because he's got the heart for it? Too many heroes nowadays are doing it because they want money or the deals. Our son wants to use his quirk to help people. Kazuya just smiled fondly. Nice for him to get some help achieving that dream. Not everybody gets that chance. Nemu couldn't help but agree. Shinsu looked at the item in his hand. When Eraserhead had mentioned weapons training he had been ecstatic. He'd thought that he'd be using the signature weapon of Eraserhead, the coiled capturing weapon. Instead, he'd been handed a simple black staff and instructed through a set of katas. He'd gone through several before he'd started to voice what was on his mind. When I asked you to train me, I thought dash. Is that whining? Shinsu shut his mouth. No, no. I just thought. I thought that I'd be teaching you to use the capture weapon. Eraserhead cut him off, the weapon floating as if to emphasize his point. When Shinsu nodded, Eraserhead sighed. Not completely illogical. But I can't. He raised a finger when Shinsu opened his mouth. Simply put, the capture weapon requires a considerable amount of training to use effectively. For the entrance exam in 8 months. Not feasible. Eraserhead picked up his own staff. Then there will be illogical arguments about nepotism as well, which will seriously hinder your score even though I won't favor you over anybody else. Shinsu looked down at his hands. Eraserhead continued talking. A staff, on the other hand, is much easier to use, and it will produce adequate results. He swung his own staff and beckoned. Now we'll practice. Shinsu made a series of moves that Eraserhead blocked, parried, made his own strikes. Shinsu made an overhead strike, then tried to shift into a leg sweep that Eraserhead blocked before it could be finished before launching a series of jabs. The whole exchange ended with Shinsu sitting in a pile of his own bruises, groaning. When did you get so good with staff moves? He managed to grunt out. Eraserhead stopped helping Shinsu up. For a moment he was looking at somebody from another time and another place. I had a friend who used a staff once. Shinsu stayed where he was, digesting this information before Eraserhead sharply rapped him in the ribs. When spinning your staff, lead with your thumb. Again. Shinsu pushed himself up, using the staff as a brace. He glared at Eraserhead, managing to steel himself. This time, when he spun his staff it was leading with his thumb in the spun direction. The rhythm came slightly easier, the staff in his hands flashing and darting out, Eraserhead briefly defending before knocking his staff aside and then quickly spinning the staff into Shinsu's ribs. The pro hero's attack left him flat on his back, staring upon at the ceiling. Eraserhead swung his staff back. Again. Shinsu pushed himself back up. After they had finished their set, Eraserhead looked across at Shinsu. You've started to get better with that staff. It might be beneficial for you to change opponents. Shinsu looked up. Who am I? The warehouse opened. Coming in was a tall man wearing a long jacket, with sharp teeth and turquoise hair covered with a black bandana. He scowled at Shinsu, before turning to Eraserhead. This the kid? Eraserhead nodded. Thank you for letting me use this place, Kojisaki. Shinsu pushed himself up, a slight grin on his face. The name's Shinsu Hitachi, not kid. Kojisaki turned around. Well, I wasn't asking. He thinks you could be a hero. He paused, then looked Shinsu in the eye. What's your quirk, kid? Shinsu paused. Brainwashing. I can take control of somebody if they respond to me after I talk. He waited to hear Kojisaki say that it sounded like a villain's quirk. Or to react with fear. Instead, the guy simply nodded. Not bad. Kind of wish we'd had that kind of quirk here in Narahata a while ago. Shinsu nodded. He'd heard about the Narahata lockdown and the actions of the villain termed Anonymous. Somebody with a brainwashing quirk could have hopefully resolved things before they turned out so badly. So this is your warehouse, is it? Something painful crossed the man's face. Something like that. Me and a Kupla buds use this place. Eraserhead's not total shit, so when he asked me for a favor I let him have it. Eraserhead shrugged. I've known Kojisaki for a while. Now, he turned to Kojisaki, I feel that it would not be a bad idea for you to spar. Quirks are allowed. Shinsu stared at his teacher. Kojisaki himself seemed out of sorts. You sure? Eraserhead nodded. You've got 10 minutes. First one to submit or be unable to fight is the loser. No lethal or incapacitating damage. Kojisaki just shrugged. Fair enough. He squared up with Shinsu, hands raised in what seemed to be a classic boxer's stance. Shinsu readied his staff. What's your quirk then, Kojisaki? Kojisaki didn't respond, instead lunging forwards, swinging a fist. Shinsu barely had time to react, he barely blocked the fist with his staff. Looking at Kojisaki's knuckles, he saw that there was a set of 3 spikes protruding out. The other guy kept up the offensive, Shinsu having to swing his staff quickly to keep the spikes from hitting him. Spikes or something, huh? Guess it fits. The other man didn't respond beyond a concentrated scowl, quickly lashing out with a series of rapid jabs. Shinsu was able to push the man back with a double-handed block with his staff, then managing to get some momentum to try using his own attacks, a shaky smile on his face. Guess you feel pretty good about beating up a middle schooler, huh? I bet dash. Kojisaki spun out with a kick to Shinsu's midsection before closing the distance, knocking him to the ground with a set of 3 spikes over his throat. They stayed like that for a few seconds before Eraserhead called out. Enough. Kojisaki stood back up, spikes retracting into his body. He offered a hand to Shinsu, who gratefully accepted it. Not bad, Hitachi. Kojisaki said gruffly. Shinsu just nodded as Eraserhead turned to him. Not a bad attempt to use your quirk in physical combat. More focus on punches or kicks would be helpful. However, you also need more practice with trying to catch attention. Yeah, that kinda tracks, Kojisaki acknowledged. You kind of tried to get me angry, which is good. But I ain't the kind of guy to react to that. Eraserhead nodded. There are other ways of attracting attention. He seemed to stop and shudder. I can name one heroine who certainly knows how to grab a response. In a different part of Tokyo, a green-haired heroine sneezed. Ah, Shouta must be talking about me. She grinned ear to ear. I can't wait for him to try and sweep me off my feet. And, this took me a lot. I actually revised substantial portions of this. Next time. Another villain strike? Please comment to feed my family. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you liked it, subscribe to my channel for more fan fictions like this, and goodbye.